Martin King was not killed by the bullet that was fired from the bushes behind Jim's grill. He was taken to the hospital. The chief of surgery, who was in there with two men in suits, gathering phlegm in their throats and their mouths. The three of them spit on Dr. King. The catheter pulled out from his neck, the pillow put over his head and face, and kill him.
The plot to kill King, I guess, is the culmination of, did you say 37 years you'd been actively?
Closer to 39 years now.
39 years. I'm urging everyone listening to buy this book, The Plot to Kill King. This book is by far the most disturbing book I've read in 10 years. It almost makes me question my faith in fellow mankind. It's appalling what happened and what you have revealed, exposed in this book. The plot was demonic. It's almost unbelievable, except for the fact that you have detailed in your 39-year effort what has happened and the ugly truth. If you think you knew something about the Martin Luther King assassination, you're going to be in for a surprise, because your detailed effort was so moving, it actually upset me. I remember during the last week several times. Let me just ask you, when you finished writing the book, what were some of the emotions you had going through this when you actually had discovered what really had gone on?
Well, I felt enormous despair. As a part of me questioned whether I should have continued this work and not interrupted this slide down a slippery slope. I think a part of it had to do with my strong love and respect for Dr. King, a kind of total disillusionment in the system, not only allow, but that would provoke and cause him to be taken from us. So that was at one level. The other level was the type of thing that you described. There is such a callous inhumanity connected with the events surrounding his death. This is your native land, and you grow up with a view that it's something other than what it really is, and that's the view that gets shattered when you're confronted with this case. And of course, I'm lead counsel for Sirhan for the same reason, because we all have come to know that he clearly was not the assassin of Bob Kennedy, and yet he will probably also die in prison as we struggle for an evidentiary hearing or a new trial. But we're not likely to be able to overcome the forces of evil who dominate this country in matters of this sort.
When you look at the planning that went into the murder and removal of Martin from J. Edgar Hoover down, it's not two or three people. You illuminated in the hospital something that totally caught me by surprise. There were several instances in this book where I thought I was aware of the facts, and I just get into one chapter and my mind's blown. There was a whole orchestrated effort to realize that once Martin had been shot, he may not be killed right on the spot. So he would have to be taken to a hospital, and a whole setup would have been there, a whole regime of military intelligence.
Well, I think suffice it to say that Martin King was not killed by the bullet that was fired from the bushes behind Jim's grill. He was taken to the hospital, and he was still alive. And he was receiving emergency care in that hospital. And what I say, and the facts that I lay out in terms of how he actually was killed, are backed up, as you know, by depositions in the book itself, by the son of a surgical nurse who was ordered out of the emergency room by the chief of surgery, who was in there with two men in suits. And as she left the room, she heard them gathering phlegm in their throats and their mouths, and that caused her to turn around. And as she was leaving, she saw what happened. She saw the three of them spit on Dr. King. Then she saw the catheter pulled out from him, from his neck, and she saw the pillow put over his head and face and kill him. So he was actually, this assassination actually took place in the hospital.
And before that, one of the emergency doctors, when he wasn't there on the spot, came in, and he was appalled that people were actually trying to resuscitate. They were trying to work on him. And do you want to?
Well, he was the chief of surgery. He said, "Stop working on that nigger and let him die," and then he made sure that he died. But the interesting thing about that surgeon is that he was also the family doctor for the Adkins family, who were the Dixie Mafia group who related over many years to Hoover, who carry out a lot of operations in around that area for Hoover, and who were very close to Clyde Tolson, Hoover's number two, who would be the one who would always come in. He would always be the one who would bring the instruction and organize things on the ground with the director of police and fire.
In the book, you say up to 10 times Tolson was, what do they call these things, a prayer meeting, when they were really...
Yeah. He would come in and he would bring money and he would bring instructions and he would work with Frank Holloman, who was the director of police and fire, as well. And he would relate very closely to the Adkins family. And he actually went away twice on transatlantic trips with Russell Adkins. So they could plan very far away, but give Adkins a little bit of courtesy pleasure and all of that. And he carried the money and gave the money that was responsible for James Earl Ray's escape from prison. That money was carried to the warden, $25,000, by Adkins himself and his son. And his son, who rode in the car with him, and his son, who sat in a lot of these meetings, and his son, who heard the same surgeon we're talking about say, "Just get him to St. Joseph's, and if he's still alive, we'll make sure he doesn't."
Right, they had plans. Don't take him to another hospital, right?
Yeah.
Don't let that where they handle. I mean, it's just staggering that.
But that meeting took place sometime, of course, well before the shooting.
No, that's what's astounding. The amount of planning that went into this. It is the opposite of James Earl Ray, this lone guy that just decided to somehow get a gun and shoot somebody.
James had been profiled at Hoover's request. They had profiled looking for a prisoner in that Missouri penitentiary system who would be an ideal patsy. James was docile. He was capable of following instructions. He would not rat. He had all of the characteristics they looked for. And so he was profiled. And then it was decided, of course, a year before to have him escape and bring him under the control of the handler. The handler, of course, was Raul Coelho.
When you look at the grand scope, when someone finishes reading your book and puts it down, and then they have a real understanding what happened, to see a Gerald Posner or a Vincent Bugliosi or these guys, it's disgusting.
It's the nature of the system to try to cover up evil that powerful interests in the system sponsor. I have an epilogue called Disinformation, and that's what you're talking about. The disinformation section started right at the time of the assassination. They began from the time of the assassination down to the present day with a more recent work by a fellow called Tavis Smiley, who is a black guy who is on has a CNN program. And Tavis Smiley, this most recent one, but all the way back to 68 and all the way down, there I document one after another sham, one after another story of disinformation, one after another book to hide the truth, because the mainstream media has now become so corrupt. So that's the reality of it and where we've become today.
Yeah, so much for the American exceptionalism.
I did, as you know, have lunch with the shooter. the actual shooter. This was a person who did not appear at all to have any conscience about what happened, why it happened.
Yeah. Why should something matter that I did 30 years ago? I mean, you just wonder how much J. Edgar Hoover must have hated. And Hoover, for all the revelations made about him, what he did to the country, and you think of how many other things that he must have been involved in that are not publicized. Like, for instance, in the book, the idea just to get Martin Luther King into Memphis, they decided to murder 2 black men in a garbage truck. Just, this is how we'll get him down here.
They had to bring him in. He was originally to have been killed in Los Angeles. They couldn't do it. They kept James Earl Ray in Los Angeles and the military backup team in Los Angeles. But it became evident they couldn't kill him there because that was where Bob was going to get hit. So they moved the Martin's killing to Memphis. And it's an upsetting, and if people don't want to learn the worst about their government or what their government has done, then I'm afraid they're in for a very distasteful experience of what an unrestricted, uncontrolled, corrupt government and officials and power structure can do to take such a good and great man from us. If he had lived, the world would have been quite a different place, in my view.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.